Street Fighter is ground-based. Mostly. But in comparison to games like these, where it's all about taking to the skies, navigating and maneuvering in the air, and playing around floating platforms, Street Fighter tries to keep the players on the ground. Aerial options are more limited, and most of the tools only work while grounded, which leads to players playing a methodical ground game, fighting over space and challenging each other's movement. But sometimes, you don't want to do all that. Sometimes you just want to say screw it, and jump. Say goodbye to the ground game and soar through the air. And everyone has a jump, it's a universal option. So let's give a quick explanation of jumps. A slow movement tool that can give you big advantage if not reacted to, but isn't difficult to stop. And some characters do have better jumping attacks than others, but some other characters have this, an alternative way to approach from the air, the Humble Divekick. I want to put a bit of a disclaimer. Dive kicks have kind of changed through the years, so I will be focusing on how dive kicks work in these games, not so much about how they are in these games. So I won't be going over what this guy can do with them once he puts you on the ground. And as always, I'll use a character to help demonstrate this specific tool. And this time, we'll finally go with Cammy. Cammy has one of the best dive kicks in the game, and one of the most consistent dive kicks in the game. But before we go into everything that the dive kick does, we have to first go in depth with the jump. The normal one that everybody has. Everybody has 3 jumps. A back jump, a neutral jump, and a forward jump. Neutral jumps are more of an offensive option, or counterplay for specific moves. And back jumps are a retreating defensive option. So when talking about jumps, I mean forward jump, jump-ins. And yes, you can jump forward without pressing any buttons and just land, but once you reach a high enough level, people don't really tomahawk or empty jump anymore. It doesn't make sense most of the time. It is used to call out a perfect parry anti-air, but that is only really done as a response. So typically a jump means this, a forward jump, throwing out an aerial move that will connect with their opponent once they land. Now with what they are explained at painful detail, let's talk about why they are. Jump-ins are done for 2 purposes, either a read that your opponent is going for a committal option, such as a big button or a fireball, or that they're just not ready to anti-air it. Jumps are slow, but so are some grounded moves. Heavies and special moves, especially fireballs, can have a lot of recovery once they're thrown out. So if you have a read on your opponent that they're gonna do something like that, you can preemptively jump in order to call it out and get a big reward. That's the first reason to do it. The second reason is even more of a call out. You don't think your opponent will anti-air you. Jumps are slow, so if your opponent is on top of it, they usually get the anti-air every time. But the game has a lot to think about, and they might be focused on something else. Which is why, even at the highest level, jumps still work. You won't always be ready for the jump, you won't always be ready to anti-air. And that's exactly when your opponent wants to jump. Now that all of that is explained, what is the outcome of the jump? We'll start off with the more common scenario. The jump fails. Your opponent wasn't doing anything and was able to react to the jump, you get anti-aired. Not great for the jumper. You get hit, but it's not that bad, usually a single hit. There are exceptions, moves like these allow for follow-ups, and some supers also work as anti-airs. But jumping generally won't ruin your health bar. But what if it doesn't fail? What if your jump is successful? What happens when you don't get anti-aired? If they don't anti-air and block instead, then you get to take your turn on offense. Jumping normals are very plus on block, meaning you get to threaten your opponent with basically whatever mix you want. It's not damage or a hit, but it's the next best thing. That's if they block. And if they don't block, you got the right read, then you get a hit, and a good hit at that. If you land a jumping normal, you can basically do whatever combo you want, and it'll be a big one. So jumping can give a very large reward. But like I previously said, this is still risky. More often than not, your opponent won't be committing to a big move and will be ready for you. Jumps have a lot of reward, but also carry big risk, which is why jumps aren't too common at higher level, but you still see them. Now that we've extensively gone over the jump, we can finally get to the title of the video, dive kicks. In most regards, dive kicks are actually worse than normal jump-ins. Whether your opponent blocks or gets hit, the advantage you get from a dive kick connecting will be worse than the average jumping normal. You aren't even guaranteed advantage if your dive kick gets blocked. And if you get a hit with one of them, it will be less damage than if you get a hit with a jump in. And in a lot of cases, a dive kick can be even slower than a normal jumping normal, making them potentially more reactable. In the case we're talking about here, Cammys are very fast, so that isn't an issue here. And most of the time, you're only allowed to go for dive kicks when you forward jump. In the case of the application we're talking about, it doesn't really matter, but it does make them a bit more limited. Dive kicks seem to have all these downsides, so what's their purpose? Is it just as a faster alternative to the jump? Yes and no. And another quick Cammy specific dive kick use, because hers is just so fast, she can use it in footsie's range and go over low pokes, which is what makes her so scary in the neutral. But again, that's just Cammy. Cammy has the speed, but characters like Jamie and Juri don't have the speed to justify that being the sole reason to use them. So why do they dive kick? Let's go over the reasons to dive kick. First reason, it's an anti-throw tool in 6, because of punish counter. In a game where basic offense can be boiled down to strike versus throw, it's a big boon to have an alternative option that directly counters the throw. Having a dive kick like these makes your defense deeper and more threatening. But that isn't the main reason for dive kick use. Nobody's at throw range here, but dives are still kicking. We're getting to the main reason now. Dive kicks fall into another umbrella of moves, jump altering moves. Here's what this means. Jumps in Street Fighter are consistent. 3 potential arcs, but all of them are consistent. If Cammy is standing here, these are the only 3 places that her jumps can take her. The jumps are consistent. You know where she's going, which is part of what makes anti-airing consistent. But with something like a dive kick, the jump arc gets altered. Once Cammy takes to the air, she can land here, 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 or even here. Now this doesn't seem like such a big deal, but I promise it is. This is the main purpose of the dive kick. Just by adding this dive kick into your aerial repertoire, it completely changes the dynamic in the air. Depending on the angle you choose to approach with your dive kick, your opponent's anti-air may not work. This Shoryuken does great against a jump-in, it does great against most jump-ins, but against the dive kick at this angle, it completely whiffs. And now that it has whiffed, Cammy can hit back with a massive combo. And with characters that don't have good anti-airs, it can be even easier to make anti-airs miss. Once a dive kick is introduced, your opponent can't just rely on muscle memory once they see you leave the ground. Now instead of your opponent just reacting and anti-airing, depending on how good their anti-air is, sometimes it becomes a much tougher reaction, and sometimes it becomes a straight up read. Either way you swing it, this forces more onto your opponent's mental stack, which I talked about here. The introduction of a dive kick either forces your opponent to divert more focus to it, meaning they are less focused on all the other nonsense you're trying to pull on them, or they just have to accept it and take it. Sometimes it's just not worth it to try to stop every single dive kick. Dive kicks need to be well spaced to even potentially give advantage. Some of them are guaranteed to be minus, and some can even be punished on block. But giving up on challenging dive kicks makes the option of the normal jump-in even more threatening. If you're just blocking the dive kick, they'll end up slipping in some normal jump-ins that they can just get away with. You've reassigned that part of your mental stack. If you have a very good anti-air, at best you'll need to invest more into mental stack, and if you don't have a good anti-air, prepare to lose some turns. For this, I will give a very, very specific example. As subtly referenced in previous videos, I was a Balrog player in Street Fighter V, and while Balrog didn't have a frame 1 air invulnerable anti-air, he did have one of the best anti-airs in the game, what Punk calls the stand brainless.
Look at you can't use the stand brainless?
Very fast at 5-frame startup, and just hits at the perfect angle to catch jump-ins. Why am I bringing this up? Because Cammy was also in Street Fighter V, and in this matchup, stand brainless was no longer stand brainless. Balrog is very weak to Cammy's dive kick, and it was such an issue that it didn't even make sense to try to challenge it. If Cammy takes to the air, just jump back and light kick. The reward is not good at all, and it gives up space, but it keeps you safe from both options. A character with an anti-air so good it's considered brainless needs to concede anytime Cammy takes to the air. Even a character with a terrible dive kick like Kage makes the stand brainless feel inadequate. So most of the time, the dive kick in isolation doesn't really do anything. Most of the time. Sometimes they're fast enough to be a better, more expensive jump-in, but most of the time in isolation they're just worse jump-ins. The dive kick makes the jump better, and the jump makes the dive kick better. Even if your character has a dive kick, if you never attempt a normal jump, then they don't have to worry about the mind game, and you have missed out on the aspect that has the most direct impact on your opponent. The threat of the dive kick forces them to second guess anti-air jumps, and the threat of the jump prevents them from just taking the dive kicks. That's the balance that the dive kick introduces to the air. I'll give another Street Fighter example that goes with the same concept. Kaba is one of the best Guile players in the world, so what is he doing here? This stand medium punch isn't hitting anyone. Look how far away he is. But he's whiffing this button for an important reason. Guile throws fireballs, and Guile likes to do it from full screen. And normally, there isn't much you can do to directly counter a fireball, especially on reaction. But certain characters have level 3 supers that let them go full screen, ignoring the fireball and punishing their recovery. Once an opponent builds up a level 3, suddenly the safe fast sonic boom starts looking a lot riskier. Once your opponent has the level 3, the Guile player realizes this. They can see the resources on the bottom, and they can also tell if they're trying to pull it off. They may be positioning differently, buffering the inputs, or you may be so low on health that it just makes too much sense to not go for it. So do you just stop throwing fireballs in this scenario? You could, but you could also do what Guile players do. Fake a fireball. The medium punch looks close enough to the animation of the boom that trigger-heavy players may bite at the wrong time, which means they won't end up punishing the Guile, it'll be the other way around. Stand medium punch here literally does nothing. It's a feint that turns the reaction test to more of a mind game, one that opens up the fireball once again. An option that is useless by itself, but in tandem with another makes both of them much better. That one was more specific, so I'll give an example that is broader. Throws. Throws hurt less than strikes. If you land a throw, you'll be taxing their life bar less than if you landed a strike, and got a combo off of it. So why are players on offense going for throws? Here's the thing, if you only go for strikes, they'll just block, and now you get nothing. Try to land a hit on offense by only going for strikes. Once they catch on, they're not getting hit anymore. So how do we dissuade this behavior? How do we open them up? We do so by throwing them, even though it grants less reward than the strike. Once the throw has been established, they can't just keep blocking, so they have to break the throw. And once they've started trying to break throws, now you can shimmy and cash out with really powerful strikes. One thing builds into another until you've got yourself a complete offense. Throws are worse than strikes, but doing both makes both of them individually more threatening. They won't tech if you never throw them, and they'll keep jumping and backdashing if you don't strike them. Good on their own, devastating together. Opens up the offense. This is what dive kicks are to a lesser extent. Jumps are the strikes, and the dive kicks are the throws. Doing one opens up the other, and vice versa. One of the worst things you can do in a fighting game is be predictable, because just about every option has a clear counter. Overrepresenting an option just makes it easier for an opponent to counter it and counter you. Give them a lot more things to worry about, and suddenly it becomes a lot harder for them. Whether it be a reactable option or a non-reactable option, the more you do, the more is on their mind, and the harder it is for them to check you. And sometimes, just one extra thing on their mind is all you need to snatch the win.
Anti-air. That could be an Evo losing anti-air, just like that.
And I don't know what the hell is wrong with you. This is Punk the God, ladies and gentlemen. Make some noise for your champion.